Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have Chris Miah, professional MMA fighter. Welcome, Chris.
How you doing? It's good to be on.
No, thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving me some of your Saturday evening. I know weekends are sacred for coaches, even though we tend to work most weekends regardless. Yeah. But do you want to give a brief background about yourself, and we'll dive into some interesting topics today?
Yeah, of course. So I've fought professionally since I was 20. I'm 31 now. I started mixed martial arts at 16 by a bit of chance, really. It just so happened that the gym I was training at was a Gracie Barra, and I had like a Valetudo kind of MMA. It wasn't really an organised sport like it is now, but there was a setup there. So I ended up starting that just by pure chance. I wanted to learn a martial art, and that was what I kind of stumbled across. And fortunately enough, at that gym there was a guy called Braulio Estima, who's regarded at the time as one of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the world. So it was kind of just luck and timing to start there. Along the way, kind of while I was fighting amateur, and then I sort of decided to make it a job with a pro. The kind of deal I had with my parents was I had to kind of have a backup plan to some extent, some degree. So I did a sports therapy degree in Birmingham while I was just turning pro and having my first few pro fights. And then I kind of pursued fighting them for about 5 years, like full time. Decent level, sort of trained in Birmingham. There was a lot of small gyms in Birmingham to begin with, and then we come under the banner like Team Renegade, where kind of most of the pros got together. So I was between Team Renegade and then what is now GB Top Team with Brad Pickett in London. So I used to be split between those two camps. After a fight in 2018, I had Bell's palsy, so I had nerve damage in my face the week after, and I couldn't like close my eye, smile, move my face. So I didn't really know what I was doing with my career at that point because I wasn't sure if I'd passed medicals, etc. So I went back and done a master's degree or a PG dip in strength and conditioning at St Mary's Uni in England as well, because that was always sort of like a passion of mine that I wanted to do after fighting. So I kind of did it a little bit sooner, perhaps, than I would have liked. So then when I've fought the last couple of years, I've been kind of juggling coaching, S&C and skill work, fighting, and then also a master's degree. But now I've kind of come to the end of a lot of those chapters and kind of moving forward in a little bit different lifestyle.
No, there's a lot to unpack in it. I think what will be very, insightful for especially listeners, maybe some of them looking to go pro or just looking to have a competitive career, is to go down a little bit down your path. And I wanted to ask you first about you doing your backup plan, doing that degree. Did you find that was, I guess, a catalyst to be helpful for you finishing your career, having that behind you already? And do you think you would be in a worse position if you didn't have that?
So, like, I think there's pros and cons both ways. You know, you get especially in our industry, you get this kind of like David Goggins, like burn the boats, just go all in, leave your family, leave your kids, go and train full time, and then you get maybe sometimes you can be a little bit too conservative. I think by having a backup plan, it probably allowed me to take pressure off myself eventually in terms of, when I always give the analogy, like when and I still even found this with the backup plan, but when you're on your way up certainly on the like internationally shows like Cage Warriors, BAMA, where ACA, where it's maybe America, something like LFA or Titan and things like that, where each fight is literally a job interview where you could go two ways, and there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. Forget the outcome of fighting and damages, but just in terms of, well, if I win this fight, I might get double my pay and an opportunity to go on whatever Dana White Contender Series or UFC call or whatever it may be, or I lose this fight and then I'm kind of back to square one. And sort of I do think by having a backup plan, that kind of it took a little bit of pressure off in terms of I've seen fighters kind of crumble under that pressure of that financial burden of every fight is a job interview, and if you've got a family to provide for or you got bills to pay, it can put a lot of pressure on you in that way.
Yeah, I actually wanted to go down that financial route. I know obviously combat sports are not well financed in terms of fighter pay at most levels unless you're a superstar. So I guess coming through the ranks, how did you end up financing training, living, all of that stuff while fighting professionally? Were you getting paid enough through the fights?
No, not like. So I was quite lucky, I guess. Like I lived at home for a long period of when I was a professional. I mean, for context, I think back in 2015, I had a world title fight on Bama offered to me. Well, actually, I fought it, but the champion at the time pulled out, so I fought another international fighter, and it was like £500.
Wow.
That was 2015, but it was £500 for a legit. That would be equivalent to probably, like I say, your LFA or your Titan or something like that in America.
Yeah.
A legit show, and it was just like. You've got no chance of standing on your own 2 feet with those kinds of pay. I'd say in England now, in the UK and Europe, it has got a little bit better. You've got Cage Warriors, and you've got things like PFL and Bellator Europe who've come over who are paying a little bit better now. But for me, it was very hard. And even at 28, I was still living at home and working like as you do, coaching a little bit S&C on the side, coaching some skills on the side, and still fighting.
Gotcha.
But then that kind of was a catalyst, like I say, when I had that Bell's palsy, to start going, well, if I can't fight, I need to be able to stand on my own 2 feet a bit more and be earning income from other streams, which is kind of what I've ended up doing. But even a lot of the pro fighters I coach, they're working the doors, or they're having to work multiple jobs, PTs, gym instructor. I don't, barring maybe, like you said, the top 1%, like the UFC world champion, everyone else at our club has to work as well as fight.
That's so nuts to think about it. And such a rapidly growing sport where there's so much money being poured in, just like fighters needing to work multiple jobs on top of training full time. It just blows my mind that that's
it's tough. Hopefully in the coming years the trajectory is up. So I hope like the guys I coach and the young kids I coach will hopefully have opportunities where they can earn enough in a career that maybe sets them up for a good life afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. So for anyone listening who maybe is looking to go down this path, how do you end up going from an amateur to a pro fighter?
So I think so when I did, and still in MMA, it's still pretty green, as in terms of like when I turned pro, it was just like I'm going to fight pro next. It was just a slight sort of change in the rule set. MMA was very archaic. Probably like I think I turned pro 2012, 2013. So it was very archaic. Now we have a really good amateur pedigree. It's starting to become a really good amateur pedigree. You got the IMAF World Championships. Yeah, they're held all right.
That's soon, right?
Yeah,
that's in like
Serbia, maybe next month in Serbia. But they've had them in Vegas before on UFC Fight Weeks, and I think hopefully the sport's moving in the direction. It seems to be similar to how amateur boxing, which I'm a big fan of myself as well. I work with a lot of boxers, and I've always been around that kind of environment. My partner's actually an amateur boxer as well, and you wouldn't dream of going pro if you hadn't won at least an area title, if not a national title. You wouldn't be seriously thinking about quitting your job and training full time unless you had a really good pedigree as an amateur. Generally speaking, as an amateur boxer, you would have some kind of warrant to go, well, this kid's got talent, let's turn him over pro. Whereas MMA was still like, I could just fight pro. Whereas I think in the coming years, your amateur pedigree and background will kind of indicate whether it's a good idea or not to actually take this as a professional job role, and whether to actually pursue it professionally and give it your all and try and make some money. Whereas maybe 5 years, even now, you'll still get people go, I'm turning pro. Who probably there might be like a 3-3 amateur. Probably shouldn't edge the bets towards a career in the UFC or trying to make a living. I think not to crush anyone's dreams either, but obviously I think there does need to be a sense of realism with it.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, reality has to hit at some point, and even if you're fighting amateur or pro, you're still in the same situation or scenario surrounding finances and having to work, right? Like it doesn't change anything else. It just changes kind of the level you're fighting and your potential to move up.
Yeah. And I would say we have some of the young amateurs, from a skill set perspective, some of the young amateurs now who certainly train at Renegade at my main gym, they're better than some of the experienced pros already. The level is just going up and up and up and up.
Nice. No, that's awesome to hear too. But I also wanted to dive into kind of your own training with this. It's interesting. You've got kind of a foot in two camps. You've got a foot in the coach's camp and a foot in the actual professional fighting camp. And so you probably have some unique perspectives here too. But do you do your own strength conditioning for your fights, or did you in the past as well?
So when I was younger, like I would have said I made a lot of mistakes. I just kind of did. I wouldn't even say anything was massively structured. Even as through my whole amateur career, even in my early pro career, you might have followed a program here or there, but nothing too structured. Coaches, skills coaches usually try to take it into their own hands then, and you'd end up doing your circuits and whatever it may be, metcons and things of that nature, which I think the trend has definitely changed from that now, which is really good, from just beasting guys. That was
slowly but surely.
Slowly. Again, maybe another topic in a bit, but I think people would still be surprised how a lot of the elite fighters still train, regardless of what the PI have done.
Go into it. Go into it.
Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of my S&C, so as I got a bit more mature and I started to understand the training process a lot more, I was always aware of my own biases, so I tended to refer out for fight camps and to have coaches coach me.
Nice.
Purely because I'm aware, just aware of my own bias, and I can justify anything to myself to do or not do. So I'm human at the end of the day. So certainly the last sort of 4 or 5 fights of my career, I outsourced my S&C and just followed it I'm good at following orders in that way. So I just found it a lot easier to follow. Now I'm not competing. Sometimes I'll have a coach. One, also to learn as a coach. So I'll get coaching off different S&C coaches, from different spectrums. Sometimes maybe an X-Trap coach or different backgrounds, just to get one. It's just, for me, it's also improving my ability to coach and getting ideas off people, but also obviously it helps you as an athlete. As a fighter, obviously, I would always generally, you want to try and have a team that you work with for a long time, in my opinion, whether that's your S&C coach, your boxing coach. I'm a big believer in sort of working with a core set of guys for a long period of time. I think that's how you really get to know your athlete, and not just get clout because I've done a 6-week camp with someone and you did these wonders, because you didn't really do a lot. So but sort of on that thing of fighters S&C, I still see, and I think most people who work with fighters or are in the gyms, that there's still a broad spectrum of people doing good things and people doing not so good things, even despite there has been a big push with the PI putting out sort of the handbooks over the past couple of years. I still think if they actually people are arguing about certain things on very niched strength and conditioning topics, but if you actually see what fighters are doing, it's a lot of it's so far away from what they think they're doing. I think maybe a big thing I've spoke to a couple of guys even at the PI about was trying to make it a bit easier to digest for the fighters, so that they can kind of start to understand what training should look like, because the handbook's great for coaches. But if you try and give that to a fighter who's not got a background in sports science or anything, they're just...
Dude, no one's reading through those 100 pages.
Yeah, you go. I've gone to the guys, put it in the group chat, read this, guys, this is gold. Not one of them's going to have read it, right? So I think trying to still educate the fighters in maybe a simpler way might be a good thing to do, because I still see a massive variance of even guys in the UFC where you look at the workouts and it's just crazy, but you don't know what you don't know sometimes. And I'm also cautious sometimes of shooting someone down, because confidence is a big thing with whatever someone's doing. So if I see a teammate who may be doing terrible training, but they're confident and they're happy, who am I to go and go, oh, that's terrible, and they got to fight in a month's time. So, but there is still a very broad spectrum in what guys are doing across the board. Yeah,
there's a time and place for change, right?
Yeah,
a month before a fight is not the time to overhaul.
What you've been doing is terrible now is not the time to say it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's a good call. I guess you mentioned about making mistakes within your own training. I'm assuming that might be part of it. But is there, I guess, anything along with that you found that, I guess, you don't do now because you deemed it, I guess, not beneficial or a mistake in the past?
I would say... this is maybe very niche to myself, but for me, I've got, you probably you'll probably know anatomy well, but I had a hip impingement for most of my career, so I had FAI, so I had a lot of hip issues, and sort of following what potentially, I think this comes down to more just following what your coaches say. But if your coach has a certain style of, whether it's jiu-jitsu, wrestling, striking, that doesn't fit your body type or your what your limitations are. I think it's important to sort of know yourself as well, and not try and force not force a square peg into a round hole. Whether that's that, okay, you don't have the dexterity of your coach is showing certain moves that maybe you don't have access to. But
like almost like 10th planet rubber guard.
Exactly.
Like there's no way in hell I'll ever get in that position.
Exactly. But I can shoot a great blast double. So if I built my game around something potentially different, double legs, body locks, and top position, that may be, which is what I ended up eventually doing. But I think certainly not dismissing coaches, but also finding the right coach and the right style for yourself that suits your attributes. It's like if you're not a big puncher, fighting like a big puncher is not a great way to go about things, or vice versa. You know, just actually like, and that only comes with experience, but kind of understanding your limitations, your strengths, and not improving your weaknesses, but also being aware of that, like your strengths are your strengths, and sticking to sort of having coaches that kind of amplify them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure, that does make sense. How was your training week structured when you were fighting? Maybe like out of camp and in camp?
So I'd say, look, the training schedule I give now is pretty much like what most of the top pros, certainly in England or Birmingham, London, like how it kind of runs. In camp and out of camp, I wouldn't say there's a ton of variance in the skill sessions, but usually people would maybe wouldn't spar, or they might come in and spar around if someone else has got a fight. It'd usually be like you'd have sort of like cage work or wrestling based practice on a Monday morning. So most gyms in England anyway have sort of pro sessions in the morning, and then you'll have public classes on the night at the gym, or your own S&C or Padman or whatever it may be. So it'd usually be like wrestling in the morning on a Monday, jiu-jitsu on a Tuesday, or submission grappling on a Tuesday, sparring on a Wednesday, submission grappling on a Thursday, wrestling on a Friday, and then sparring on a Saturday. One sparring session 16s, one sparring session bumpers, and then on the evenings, usually filling the gaps of working with a private striking coach, whether that's Thai boxing or boxing, whatever the athletes prefer. S&C, so like usually two strength and power based sessions most guys would do, and then supplementary cardio, or I guess filling the gaps on what someone needs. So some guys might be doing more extra cardio, some guys might be needing to go to extra grappling classes because they've got to catch up in that area. But generally speaking, pro sessions in the morning, and then some obviously filling the gaps on the evening with what you need and what fits your schedule, tends to be the way 90% of the pros sort of go, which is what I was doing towards the end of my career, sort of the last 4 or 5 fights.
Nice. And you found that, I guess, worked well for you and your body as well?
Yeah, I found it good, and that's something actually like there's always the debate on sort of like the high-low models that people run, but in my experience, I haven't found most guys ever actually run that in practice. They tend to be a hard session and an easier session a day, rather than doing just because the body's like, if you've done a really hard wrestling practice to go and go, well, we're going to go and do 90%. Or 85% on deadlifts in the evening just isn't happening, So sort of trying to tie in them high-low models. I tend to find usually guys are having like one good hard practice a day in some capacity, and then usually a bit lighter in the evening. In my experience, that's how I've seen most things ran. Nice.
And I guess within that strength power session, you obviously mentioned like obviously ripping heavy deadlifts and stuff after maybe hard wrestling practice is a mission, and I know I've felt that myself too. So what does like a strength power session look like in that regard if your hard session is in the morning for the actual technical training?
I think it depends on the athlete that you've got, so, and their experience, where their kind of weak holes are. If max strength was a weak hole, you may have to look at their overall training for a short period of time to allow them to give those efforts within the weight room to build that capacity. But if they're already a reasonably decent athlete, it may look like, I'm similar to kind of the post, which is what kind of gravitated me towards when I've seen your pages. Sort of like, generally when I would run a session, you'd start with some like a lot of like extensive jump work to begin with, maybe some kind of power development exercise, something easy-ish to learn, usually like trap bar jumps or weighted jump variants, a lower body lift, and then I guess. So for me, at the end of my career, I always had very high like absolute strength from a weight class. So I started to pick lifts that were, or work with coaches that would give me lifts that didn't put as much stress on my body.
Yeah.
So maybe single leg variations or RDLs over a trap bar deadlift or a back squat, purely because the poundages were a little bit lighter and it still gave me a good stimulus. That was for me. I wouldn't say to do that with everyone. I just that's just what I found. But picking obviously like lifts that sort of complement you, that don't fatigue you too much. Generally staying well off sort of failure, well off sort of 7-8 RPE. Sort of even when I prescribe stuff, most of the stuff from my combat guys is around that area. Just moving weight well with decent bar speed, and then usually some robustness work at the end on sort of key injury sites. Maybe top up conditioning if they feel they need to, and trying to match the conditioning with whatever the lift they've done. So if they've done heavy strength and power lift, they'll try and give some lactic intervals or something like that alongside it.
Nice. I love that. I love that that philosophy around, hey, you don't always need to be doing heavy bilateral squats, deadlifts, etc. Obviously, heavily taken from the powerlifting world. You manage to work around, hey, I'm strong enough. I need to do things that aren't going to injure me. I mean, you mentioned you had a hip impingement. I'm assuming like squatting and stuff probably aggravated it.
Yeah, so like deep hip flexion. So towards the end of my career, started to flare up. It still does. I can get away with it sometimes, but if I'm spinning too many plates where I'm dieting, sparring hard, and then deciding to squat hard, then again it's a case of spinning too many plates where something starts to give a little bit. But that doesn't, like I say, that's what I found. That doesn't mean, so if I have a youth athlete who's relatively weak, like I train quite a lot of amateur boxers as well, like in my own S&C business, and a lot of them are probably don't have the issues. I've always lifted since I was very young, so when they're like weak, like they may be doing a lot of bilateral stuff and they're not really taxing their body that hard because their absolute poundages, the actual relative intensity of what they're is quite low. So they can get away with that for a couple of years on end without really running into issues. But I think especially when you're talking to, I mean, I'm 31 now. My last fight I was 30, because you start to, and I've fought since I fought pro since I was 20. So I think when you're starting to work with guys who have mileage on them, adjusting plans for them to feel good at sparring is the be all and end all. Developing a little bit less, so you want to try to still kind of develop capacities, but being healthy is key. And I think that's why when we see the training programs, or we see athletes do maybe what might be considered some quite esoteric things on social media, or I think that generally isn't what got them to the dance. That may be just where they're at in their chat. And I always give George St. Pierre as like the best example I've seen. Is like he worked with a coach for 10 years, John Chainberg in Canada, as a good strength and conditioning coach. Then he decided, well, I'm going to do some gymnastics and I'm going to do some, and then all of a sudden everyone in England's doing gymnastics and going, we don't need weights. Forgetting he's done 10 years of good, solid, robust strength and conditioning. So what you might see someone do at a certain point in time probably isn't what got them there, and like making them adjustments and sort of realising that's quite important, I think, for coaches and athletes.
Dude, that's such a good point, man. I mean, remember the craze with Conor McGregor doing his touch butt in the park. And then
exactly, yeah.
And then everyone jumped on that bandwagon too. I mean, I don't think anyone does that anymore, but that was the big thing, that's
movement,
what makes Conor move so well.
Yeah, of course. And I think like that's obviously in terms of lessons. I think, I've made them mistakes. You're looking at what your favourite fighter's done, or what someone you're reading a magazine, and a friend of mine, I used to work with him, I used to coach him, but he was a former professional boxer, Matthew Macklin. He's a friend of mine. He used to look up to this boxer, and he was like, he used to run 5 miles a day, 5 days a week, and then he's copying him, said it in a magazine. And then he's like, he met him in real life once, and he didn't even run them 5 miles, 5 days for a magazine. And you were thinking it's the gospel, and you were thinking, well, my favourite fighter does this, and what's half published isn't what they're doing anyway. So I think certainly, certainly doing, certainly hiring professionals who can look from the outside in and see what's best for you, I think, rather than following trends for a young fighter is key.
Oh yeah, and I like how you mentioned about you're looking at like 7 to 8 RP on most lifts, and to me, like consistency is that thing for athletic development. I mean, young, even young, old, whichever athlete, just being able to train consistently without injury is going to get, is going to be that ticket to whatever you're trying to get to. But do you want to maybe explain to the audience what you mean by 7-8 RPE and kind of how they could implement something like that in their training?
Yeah, so RP is rate of perceived exertion. It's just effort level in simple terms. How difficult you find it, and there is some argument that maybe you need to be a little bit experienced training to be able to truly gauge where you're at, and someone who's a novice maybe undershoots, but that's why you have a coach as well to kind of see where you're at when you're doing lifts. But so a 7 or 8 RPE is essentially a 7 or 8 effort level out of 10. Or you can work reverse and go like reps in reserve. So maybe you'd have 2 or 3 reps left in the tank after you finish your set. The reason I really like this certainly for combat sports athletes is because we're not powerlifters, as you said. We're not married to squat, bench, deadlift. Our numbers are a means to an end. So as you say, if you're consistently lifting over weeks, months, years, the weight is going to go up, and we're going to get you're going to get pretty strong. Now, we're not trying to get good at lifting weights at 95% or 100% like a powerlifter, that is a skill in and of itself. But the risk that comes with that, when then we're going to be rotating, changing direction, doing a lot of awkward movements in grappling and wrestling, I don't believe that outweighs the benefit of lifting in that top echelon, perhaps unless you're in an off season, I would say. But what it allows you to do is have good bar speed as well on most of your lifts. Like generally the bar is going to move quite quickly, and we know in terms of strength and power gains, that's a pretty good thing to be having rather than grinding reps out, barely making a lift. I think in terms of it can be difficult because combat sports athletes have the mentality, and myself is like, you always want to push.
Yeah, just grind.
To grind, but sometimes it's like, especially in the weight room, I feel like we place way too much emphasis on like chasing weight, and I know I did, again, another mistake I would say. The weight will come over time anyway, regardless. And a 7 or 8 RPE doesn't mean that. So you're 7 or 8 RPE, even if you're doing it on week 1 and week 4, your weight's still probably gone up, because what would have been an 8 effort, as you adapt, you would still be lifting heavier weight. But for me, it's like I prefer, me personally, to kind of leave them max out efforts for the most important thing, which is usually sparring or wrestling rounds or things like that. You only have so much effort that you can give in a training week, and to me, the bigger rocks are practice over the weight room.
Yeah, for sure. How far do you stray away from, for example, you mentioned some of the single leg stuff you were doing and extensive plyometric things, like these are kind of like the fundamental things that kind of underpin a lot of the strength power training, I mean, within most sports. But do you stray, I guess, any or very far from those with combat athletes? Like maybe closer to a fight, are you looking at more kind of specific preparation exercises, or is there anything that you like to incorporate as you get closer to a fight or for certain athletes?
I tend to have a little bit more focus, certainly in the strength and power, certainly in the power development side of moving a little bit quicker, depending on what we've been using. So sometimes things like French contrast, where you'll run through obviously the whole spectrum of sort of the velocity, the force velocity curve. Again, even with that, like that, I'd save that for very experienced athletes. So I've actually not done that. I used to do it probably like most of us. You learn something great where it's triphasic, French contrast, you think it's amazing, and then kind of have a little look on, okay, it's useful here, maybe not with this athlete, maybe with this athlete. I actually kind of stay very, very general with my strength work. So it will be a lot of extensive jumps, even like med ball work, a lot of extensive med ball work, and it will move to a little bit more intensive, as in like especially in the med ball work, in terms of a little bit more intent behind the throws. We'll tend to start extensive at the start of camp and work very intensive, high effort as we get towards the end, certainly with the med ball work. With the jumps, a little bit. I don't tend to do a ton of depth jumps and drop jumps and things like that anymore. I tend to stay, especially when you look at there's smarter coaches than me, but people have started to look at the double pulse effect and things of how we actually create force striking. So sometimes trying to mimic that with throws and sort of, that's about as specific as I would get. In terms of sort of like heavy, like big depth jumps or sport specific movements, I tend to maybe prescribe, this probably comes from my sports coaching side of things, but I'll prescribe potentially like capacity based circuits with fight situations in. So I will start to have a bit of going like, well, we're going to work to rest on this, but we're working on a single against the fence, or we're working and start making the conditioning more specific. I would say that's where I'd go more specific than the strength and power based work. Maybe I'd give something like back work with elastic intervals and things like that, which is again is a little bit more specific. But I tend to go more specific with the conditioning and still keep the strength work fairly general and trying to keep them as robust as possible to do the sparring and the skill work. I know there's probably other people that are going to have different schools of thought, but that's just kind of where I've come to right now, where we're not an absolute, like if you were a sprinter or a thrower or a lifter, where we have to peak our certain capacity for that one capacity for that day, comparatively to where we need to still have multiple qualities running, plus all of the skill components of on fight day. I don't think it's as big of a deal as people sometimes make it.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have medicine ball exercises, or have you ever had to coach someone that doesn't have a wall to throw things against? Do you have medicine ball exercises that you go to in that instance, for example, for the extensive circuits or even some of the intensive throws?
Sometimes I'll get them to, so this is something I've had, particularly with remote clients lately, sometimes I will get them to kind of like go to throw and pull back. So kind of get like a contraction in that way, or come up with a decent swap to maybe something like a bench push off if there's a bench, if I'm looking just for some chest pass or something, and maybe do something, maybe split it. So maybe do some kind of bench push off or something ballistic, like a ballistic row, and then also include some core work, some more dynamic core work. Maybe they got a cable column that could do wood chop. I still think it's kind of compartmentalizing it rather than doing it as a combination movement set up with a ballistic throw.
Yeah, no, that's good. So for anyone listening, obviously not everyone has access to a wall or space to throw a medicine ball. Those are all good options too. But I wanted to dive into as well. Obviously, we've talked about how sparring during that week is the most important session to be prepared for. So how do you modify, I guess, the extra strength conditioning, whatever, on maybe the day before or even the day after, so you are fresh for sparring and so you can essentially recover from the sparring?
So this is, I don't think most fighters have them. This is certainly in England. Most fighters don't always have that control, purely because different coaches run different practices. And I still see across the board that there isn't that communication side of things. I've said this before on a few other podcasts where the coach who coaches Tuesday grappling is probably not speaking to the coach who ran Monday wrestling. He's probably not speaking to the S&C coach. That is still, unfortunately, there may be the biggest teams and at the highest level, things like that, but most fighters are still not having that kind of communication. In terms of S&C, in camp, I would say I try to tie in the conditioning, hard conditioning, as a top up after sparring with some of the guys. So I'm not going to ask them to do, so people give like cardiac power intervals and things like that on a Tuesday after sparring on a Wednesday. But what I would do is spar on a Wednesday, do your rounds. If in a perfect world, you have a heart rate monitor on, and maybe you do a top up after, depending on how many rounds you've sparred, and get it in that one hit. So then you can give you ample time to recover to then get for your next sparring session on a Saturday. That's kind of the route I go. In terms of strength and power, I find I'm very much a prescriber of, I think you've had him on as a guest, like Will Whalen. He's like a high intensity, low volume plan in camp. So I don't think it taxes you that much. If you stick to those kinds of principles, I don't think it taxes you too much because the volume's quite low. So even if you did a good, hard, heavy lift on a Tuesday, it might even potentiate you for sparring on a Wednesday morning, provided you've built up to handling the weight and sort of you're used to that stimulus. I don't think it interferes too much.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to maybe give an example of, I guess, a high intensity, low volume session, kind of maybe how that would look in terms of maybe like a little like general exercise selection and set rep?
Yeah, so like, I mean, I can give an example. This is how low volume I used to make bantamweight, which is quite a bit lower than I am right now. But it would literally, in camp, I would literally be doing, 2 sets of 3 on a major compound exercise with maybe between 80 and 85% 1RM, depending on how I felt that day. We'd have a little bit of wiggle room just depending on how beat up I was, but generally checking some kind of power development, and then whether that's lower limb or upper body, and then usually some kind of squat pattern, hinge pattern, push pull, and some accessories that are unique to myself, like whether it would be groin rehab or whatever it may be. And literally maybe a little bit heavy, a little bit more, maybe like 2 sets of 5 on the upper body stuff. But generally on some of the heavy lower body stuff, literally like 2 sets of three, 80 to 85%, would literally be a session, and you'd come out and not really too fatigued, but you're maintaining the qualities that you built out of camp. And I think that's probably a useful point, is most of the qualities that you're going to build, in my opinion, from our job as a strength and conditioning coach, are going to be built out of a fight camp. So then ideally through camp, we want to be preserving and maintaining those qualities with the like a minimum effective dose. I'm not the biggest fan of someone going, well, I've got a fight now in 10 weeks. I'll start my strength and conditioning now. Because like those kind of adaptations that we want to take place, particularly from strength and power, aren't really going to manifest in an 8-week fight camp when you're in a calorie deficit and training so much.
Yeah.
So the high intensity, lower volume in camp, why that works well, in my opinion, is it doesn't fatigue you for your main body of work, which is your sparring, your grappling, your pad work, etc. But you're able to still maintain it, and even to some degree improve your outputs that you've built up over the last 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and kind of maintain those qualities as you go through camp, which in my eyes that's where our job, in my eyes, is mainly done out of camps, and we kind of guide them through a training camp, trying to maintain what we've built, and almost be an agony aunt for this hurts, this is injured, I need to work around this, I need to work around this, and trying to get them to find out as fresh and as healthy as possible.
Yeah, I love the example you gave. Just 2 sets of 3. I know some people listen to this might be like, how the fuck do I do anything with 2 sets of 3? But I don't think people almost realize how little you can really do and still get a training effect and still maintain or even improve certain qualities. And as you mentioned, you're doing this and you should come out almost feeling like it's an extended warm-up.
Yeah.
And you feel really damn good. And that's kind of the effect you're after.
And certainly in the strength and power realm. And then, there's different schools of thought with conditioning. I see, some coaches love metcons and circuits, and I even see it. We've got quite a lot of friends out at Tiger Muay Thai right now, and they're doing absolute beasting circuits.
Oh yeah, I've seen some of those on YouTube. Yeah. Man, they get absolutely hammered.
So, and that's not my preference of how to go about conditioning for combat sports. Like, I'm a big believer, kind of, in really using the sport to drive a lot of conditioning, or well-designed drills within sports practice to drive that conditioning, rather than just beastings and circuits of non-specific activities. But I know different people use different things. But I think certainly from strength and power, sort of like those examples there, have kind of been what I've found work well with my athletes, and they also work very well in my career.
Nice, yeah. And if anyone's listening who's in the Sweet Science of Fighting Underground membership in the Discord this week, on Thursday we'll have Andrew Usher. We're doing a little live chat. I did some Wingate tests and almost died, and he took my heart rate data and put some fancy graphs over it all. So we're going to go through that. So if anyone's interested, check out that Discord, and we're going to run through, I guess, some interpretations of that data. But how often do you come across fighters that start the S&C when they're coming into a 10-week fight camp?
So in MMA now, I think it's certainly changed. Boxing wise, I still get certainly private sector. A lot of my work has always been with amateur and professional boxers. I would say because they get paid a little bit more, so they have a little bit more finances to be able to hire a one-to-one coach. Whereas a lot of the MMA guys I work with tend to be remote because it's more affordable, because they don't get the kind of paychecks professional boxers do, fundamentally. But a lot of that mentality is like, I'm in fight camp now, so I'm going to start everything now. S&C, running, boxing more.
Shit.
And I don't tend to work with those guys anymore. I try to. It may mean a loss of custom short term sometimes, because so that doesn't really work out. But I think it's trying to change kind of the mindset of boxers and MMA fighters, that it's a year round goal. Like you mentioned about consistency, it's the same with skill development. Look at most of the world champions now. They've just put in the years and years. They've had ups, they've had downs, whatever, and they've put in the years of getting better at the craft. And I think changing that fight camp mentality is the best way to. I always give the example of amateur boxing. Like, an amateur boxer may have 20 fights in a year. He's always within touching distance of where he needs to be, and it's probably where a guy makes their biggest improvements as a fighter. when they're competing regularly and they're just on the cusp of competing regularly. So when we've got amateur fighters or even low-level pros in MMA having 12-week fight camps to fight twice a year, they're leaving so much development off the table from an S&C standpoint, from a skill standpoint, from a learning standpoint. And I don't see them all as, they're not different. They're all intertwined. They're all a long-term process. It takes years to get strong. It does take years to get to a strength level. It takes years to get good at wrestling, years to get good. So trying to bring them all up together consistently over a longer period of time, I think is what we want to try and educate fighters to be doing, rather than this fight camp, 8 weeks, I'm going to get in shape and then I'm going to chill for 8 weeks and just repeat.
No, that's for sure. Do you want to maybe give some examples as well for the listeners? You obviously mentioned about this specific conditioning, for example, single leg up against the cage and the work to rest ratios. Maybe just a few specific partner drills you like to do for conditioning for MMA, and then maybe just some of the work to rest ratios you're looking at.
Yeah, so the one thing I always do, and I do this. We've done this at Renegade. We've done it at American Top Team when I was over there with Brad, and they will simulate 5-minute rounds in certain capacities. This is more near a fight where you might pick up a big injury if you're sparring. So it's trying to obviously avoid injuries at the late stages of camp. But they may use something like ground and pound on a heavy bag, someone defending a single leg against the fence, maybe some upper body pummeling, fighting for double underhook. So micro games within MMA that you can kind of battle really intensely without necessarily high risk of injury. And I think that's kind of, you want to be able to give a work to rest would vary on what you're trying to achieve as an outcome, whether you're trying to work on. So even with the kids, we'll do 1 minute goes with a minute off and give an even work to rest ratio and let them really give high effort. And I even like that a lot with skill development as a coach on the mats, because for that, but when someone does a 5 minute round, full well they're going to coast. Yeah. You're doing a 5 minute round of wall work, starting in a position, you're going to get a good position, you're going to chill out for a while. I think obviously when you're doing minute goes or 30-second goes or 2 minute goes, your intensity is up a lot more, which replicates what we're looking for on a fight night. But you can manipulate the work to rest to whatever suits you. I think it's just finding safe situations you can give 100% effort in. Because obviously the risk of injury, you don't want to be going ballistic and getting injuries, and you need good partners to do that. But certainly over-under games, fighting from over-unders, looking for double underhooks, looking to pin someone against the fence, someone circling off, and you can give 100% and the risk of injury is pretty low. The better guys can just do specific sparring, maybe one's starting on a single, maybe one's on a grounded double, and then also intermixing that then with a good whoever their regular coach is for pad work or striking. So you can kind of get that level change of up and down. And then, like I say, the work to rest can literally be manipulated by whatever constraint you want. For striking, I do like the kind of the lactic kind of prescription of maybe 8 to 10 seconds of a hard combination, active recovery, touching, moving, feinting, and sort of, anywhere from, usually I go on the minute every minute, but anywhere from a 5-to-1, 6-to-1 work to rest ratio for a lactic work. And I think that works well for striking. For grappling, you can start to push sort of 2 to 3 minute goals and sort of touch on that kind of threshold type training where heart rate's a little bit higher. And maybe you're working for 2 or 3 minute blocks and then having 2 or 3 minutes off as a block. You can literally make it whatever it wants to be. I just think it's important that it's safe and you obviously got partners that know what they're doing to drive a conditioning benefit from it. And I guess that would be always the counter argument for prescribing conditioning with non-specific means is if someone's of a lower level and they don't necessarily have the knowledge to be able to do those things. You could always, it's easier to stick someone in an aerodyne or a ski erg and drive an output than it is for someone to do that with specific sparring on a single leg if they're not a good wrestler, for example.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I guess for someone like myself who kind of sticks in one realm or one martial art, for mixed martial arts, obviously you have that transition, grappling, striking, depending on how the fight goes, who you're fighting, etc. Are you training that transition between striking and grappling often? Is that something you find is where people tend to lack in terms of maybe conditioning or anything like that?
Yeah, and it's probably the biggest area that certainly in my city, now my generation of fighters are all starting to, they're either really high, there's people like Tom Breeze, Leon Edwards, myself, Yannick Bahati. We're all the same age. We're pretty much the same generation as Birmingham MMA fighter. Where all the coaches in Birmingham before were very old school, not the greatest sort of level of mixed martial arts. We've come from that thing of where it is about combining everything together, where it is about mixing takedowns with strikes, strikes with takedowns, ground up, level changing up and down. And I'd say like a lot of practice that I teach is always that anyway. But if I get someone from an individual discipline and they come over, that's the biggest thing that they struggle with, generally speaking, is changing the levels up and down, up and down. You get a striker and then they're going grappling and striking, grappling and striking, and even a grappler doing the same thing, you find they get very tired. But I think that just comes from training, being comfortable in those areas, being comfortable doing that is the sport. And so if practice reflects that, and I think that's the biggest, in my opinion, one of the biggest things of conditioning is being comfortable doing whatever it is you're doing. So if you're predominantly a grappler and you strike and spar, I guarantee you're going to be exhausted just because purely on a proficiency standpoint. Vice versa, you take a pure striker and make them grapple, they're exhausted, they're like, this is the hardest thing ever. So MMA, in my opinion, is its own sport. Even if you take a very good grappler and do grappling, but there's shots coming in, ground and pound, the person might just get up and fuck off and go back to his feet. That changes their sort of comfortability level when they're training. The heart rate's going to be elevated, they're nervous, they're anxious. So I think like the more comfortable we can make training as a general, okay, I'm an MMA fighter, so therefore this is what MMA is. They're going to be more comfortable in all scenarios.
Yeah, I guess, do you have any advice for someone who's maybe looking to get into MMA, if they should start with find an MMA gym and just do MMA, or should they then find maybe a Muay Thai gym and just do Muay Thai and just do Jiu-Jitsu and then come to MMA? Do you have a school of thought on that? It sounds like from what you're saying, it would be go to an MMA gym, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
I think now, as coaching improves, go to an MMA gym. But that usually means that you're still working with the individual coach. Like, you're still working with a black belt in jiu-jitsu for your jiu-jitsu. You're still working with a good striking coach. You're still working I still believe in training the individual facets. I think there's value in going to a boxing club and sparring straight boxing. I think there's value in learning straight Muay Thai for Muay Thai and straight jiu-jitsu for jiu-jitsu. But I do think now, as the sport's growing, you can start learning MMA from the start. And I think providing the coaching reflects that. So for me, coaching 5 to 10 years ago, especially in Europe and England, people who coached MMA were just not very good at anything. So that was the reality. Like they were very, very average at everything. So therefore, the coaching then I'd have said, no, go to a jiu-jitsu club, go to a wrestling club, go to a great boxing club or a Thai boxing club. Whereas I do believe in the coming years that where there will be an environment where you can learn mixed martial arts. And like I always think like AMC Pancration, I think, which is Matt Hume, Demetrius Johnson's coach. I've always been a huge fan of both of those guys. And I think he made Demetrius compete in individual facets, first of all. So boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu. But the emphasis has always been on putting it together. He's not trying to be the best submission grappler in the world. He's not trying to be the best boxer in the world. He will compete in them sports to gain knowledge and to understand the art, but he's generally trying to become the best mixed martial artist. I think sometimes you can go to a boxing gym, get beat up a little bit by one of a good amateur, and then you start making that your complete goal and take your foot off that your goal actually used to be UFC world champion or IMAF world champion. And it's the same with jiu-jitsu, trying to excel and be a IBJJF or Mundial Gi world champion. He's almost a completely different skill set to what you would need to be a mixed martial art. And if you look at like the Sambo guys now who are all really starting to dominate, that's the closest thing to mixed martial arts that you have as an amateur sport. And they're all dominating. I think Craig Jones even said the other day, he was a phenomenal jiu-jitsu guy. He was saying that the Sambo guys have got it right in terms of what works for MMA over modern jiu-jitsu and how modern jiu-jitsu has evolved. So I think if you have the right coach, like the level of coaching, and you have the right mindset, I think certainly learning MMA for MMA now will be what takes guys forward into the future. But obviously, if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's a good jiu-jitsu club and a good boxing club, maybe you go there for a few years first. So in a perfect world scenario, we just have loads of Habibs and Nurmagomedov's coaching us, and we just learn sambo, combat sambo from the start, and we're good to go. But obviously, everyone lives all over the world, so it is making do with what you've got. But I think both styles can work.
Yeah, nice. I wonder if Sambo now more Sambo style gyms will start to open up around the Western world, since I guess with their success in the UFC, you never know.
Yeah, or at the very least, I think submission grappling now is moving in the direction of a more efficient style of jiu-jitsu for MMA.
Yeah.
There's such a big focus now on wrestling and getting up and hoisting and grappling and sort of mixing college wrestling with jiu-jitsu in essence. I think that is going to make grappling a lot more exciting in mixed martial arts in the coming years, with that kind of hybrid style of jiu-jitsu and wrestling. Whereas jiu-jitsu in the 90s and early 2000s was like close guard arm bars and triangles, and they just get beat up by wrestlers, really. So I think the new hybrid style of jiu-jitsu in sort of ADCC and sort of when you got like Danaher's guys, B team, people like that, I think it's going to be a really exciting style to see how that translates to MMA in the coming years.
No, for sure. I'm with you there. I think I covered pretty much everything I had to ask you here, Chris. But if anyone wants to find you and follow you and see what you're up to online, where can they do that?
I've got my main Instagram handle, Chris Miah MMA. I sort of post general life stuff, but also some of the coaching stuff I work with, the fighters I work with, and some of my own training. Whether I ever come out of retirement or not, we don't know yet. Just
you have to announce it on the podcast.
On there, and I generally reshare decent posts and just obviously try and put out the work that I do as well. So any follows are appreciated and hopefully useful for your listeners.
Awesome. I'll link all that up in the description too. But thanks for coming on, Chris. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Great to be on. Thank you.